I'd like, if you could, to describe for the viewers some of the things that you have heard that the leadership or the chain of command has done to soldiers that do not want to participate in this.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting because there were very ambitious officers in the command ranks who saw this as an opportunity to basically step on their own troops to get that promotion. Mm-hmm. An example of that was the brigade commander at CFB Edmonton, he's based at CFB Edmonton, but the Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group out here was Colonel Rutland. He's now a brigadier general. Mm-hmm. He became a brigadier general by setting up a review board that reviewed every single accommodation request of anyone who was under his command, which went against the Chief of Defense Staff directive, because the directive said that the commanding officers were on the ground were the ones who were supposed to make the decision on accommodations. What was happening is they were getting accommodations, and that wasn't supposed to happen. So I'll call him Brigadier General Rutland now, set up this review board of people who were not cleared to see any medical information, certainly not personal information, to review all these requests. And I haven't seen anybody be accommodated by that review board. Let's put it that way. They basically rejected them all. Mm-hmm. I've seen some very interesting explanations. Apparently, on a balance of probabilities, someone's faith and religion can't be harmed by accepting the medical treatment that they were being ordered to take. I don't know how you assess someone's faith on a balance of probabilities. Mm-hmm. Well, that one caught my attention.
Yeah, that's interesting because, religion is one of the 13 prohibited grounds of discrimination,
yes.
Within Canadian law. And the other thing is the Privacy Act is another federal act that comes into play here. I know when I was in the military, I was not authorized in any way, shape, or form to see the medical files of any soldier under my command, and nor was I required to turn over my own medical information to the chain of command. Right. I mean, I had seen, I was injured in a parachute accident. I had hip surgery. Yes, the chain of command knew that the doctor was putting me on sick leave, but they give you the chit that tells you the duration of the time. They don't tell you what your medical information is about, exactly. Especially when it comes to mental health issues. That's not something that is covered, or the business of your chain of command. If a doctor gives the order and says, this is the way it's going to be, the chain of command has no right to overrule that. But yet, we get into this situation and it seems like not only medical ethics are thrown out the window, but the Privacy Act and one of the 13 grounds of discrimination is thrown out the window. So,
right. Well, and you talk about private medical information. Pregnant women had their privacy completely blown out of the water from the base surgeon calling their obstetricians to say, you're not going to let her have any leave, even for a high-risk pregnancy, because she's just using this to get out of what has been ordered. So one of them was even charged AWOL because she was hospitalized. I mean, we're getting into things. One was told she couldn't have maternity leave. By law, she's allowed maternity leave. Another was told, well, the Army likes to keep their pregnant women. How did the nurse put it? The Army likes to keep their pregnant women working as long as possible.
Well, now, that's great as a policy. You want to recruit
more women into the military?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's great as a policy, but it's not good in terms of medical privacy and healthcare.
And speaking of medical privacy got thrown out the window with this directive, there were several directives, but everyone was required to put their vaccination status into what's called Monitor Mass, which is a general portal. It was not Protected B at the time. not meant for personal, private information, and everyone's information went out. And I've got hundreds of affidavits that will confirm that everyone could see what your vaccination status was, which of course, not only is that a privacy issue, but that also led to discrimination, bullying, harassment, because everybody knew.
Right.
From seeing it. I mean, I've got commanding officers that were putting theirs in at the last minute because they didn't think it was any business of anyone below them to know their vaccination status.
Right.
So,
did you find that there was a certain amount of, let's say, your clientele that are coming from the medical system within the Canadian military? Because we have military doctors and nurses and technicians and everything. Are any of your clients, without names obviously, but any of your clients coming from the medical trade within the Canadian military?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Doctors and technicians and nurses.
Good.
Very much so, because they were basically told not to report adverse events.
Right.
They were basically told that absolutely no one was to get a medical accommodation. Even someone who had already had an injury from an injection the first time, with the first dose, where the medical command was they did not get a chit to get out of a second. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And injuries weren't to be reported.
Right.
I've even got on my list people that will testify to the psychological operations that were happening at the time.
Are any of your clients injured?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Obviously, we're trying to be very cautious here about getting strikes, but is there a percentage? Would you say that there's a percentage of your clients that have been injured?
So I limited how many injured members there were in this particular lawsuit because there's another lawsuit coming just for the injured.
Got it.
But there were a few that I would say, just quickly thinking about numbers, 5 to 7%.
Okay.
Keeping in mind that most of my clients did not did not go for the treatment. So, of those that did, there's a significant number that, and the adverse events are quite severe.
Right.
Yeah. Life changing.
Okay.
Events.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about harassment because you mentioned that earlier, and I have heard many unsubstantiated cases, and I don't like to delve into rumors, especially in the military, because it's it's a very fertile ground.
It's a hotbed of gossip.
It certainly is. It's the first time I ever heard the rumor mill. The saying "the rumor mill" was from the military. So, yes, it's full of rumors and barrack room lawyers. So I want to be very careful. So, what are some of the extreme cases of harassment that you may have heard, amongst your clientele?
From things such as someone on paternity leave called me and said there's 2 men in uniform downstairs and they are demanding that I sign paperwork. What do I do? And keep talking to me on the phone until they leave, because in Canada we don't have people in uniform showing up demanding you sign papers.
No,
not the Canada I want to live in anyway.
Exactly.
To people being told that they would never be able to work again and their families would starve, that they were basically going to get throwing their life away, they'd lose their pensions, which wasn't true, not with that release category. Then we get to extremes of a young woman they cleared the room she was working in with her coworkers, sent them all home, took her into another room with 4 senior officers who were all male, and demanded she sign a piece of paper that said she wouldn't follow a lawful order. And they kept her there until she would sign it, which was quite a bit of time. And she had just come back. Yeah, she had just come back from stress leave. So,
great.
You know, this is. I think there's a word for that, interrogation. Mm-hmm. You'd be questioned about it. Yeah. The worst example, though, and this was of all my clients, this has been nominated as the worst story, was a young man in Quebec in January, or around about January, just around the time of the convoy. Mm-hmm. So you know how cold it was.
It was.
He's in Quebec, and he was forced to be outside for 3 months on duty while his coworkers were walking past him, name-calling, giving him jibes. They'd be at the window, saying things to him through the window from inside the building. He lasted 3 months, lost about 20 to 30 pounds of muscle mass before he finally broke psychologically and voluntarily released.
Right.
But I'll be honest with you, in my mind, that was physical torture. Mm-hmm. And
well, I had
commanding officer, you know.
I had heard very similar stories across the other brigades as well, so Petawawa, Edmonton, as well as Quebec, that the soldiers that refused to participate in the experiment were not allowed to enter any of the indoor spaces where there was other soldiers who did participate. And at one point, they were being required to wear their DEUs or their dress uniforms out in a modular tent that was placed outside. And at one point, I've been told that in Petawawa, they removed the heaters from those soldiers that were in their dress uniforms in a tent outside in the winter. You know, I don't, you know, soldiers are used to dealing or having to adapt to extreme weather conditions. But I think this goes far beyond that. This is where you're deliberately isolating and segregating soldiers and treating them like lepers, as opposed to members of your team that just have the self-respect and the critical thinking skills to abide by their own autonomy, bodily autonomy. And, you know, a lot of people think, hey, you get all these other procedures done all throughout your career. The difference being is that those other procedures have a long track record. They are approved federally. And not in every case, because we've got 2 cases where, you know, medication was distributed to soldiers and they were harmed. Mefloquine is one that comes to mind. And there's a case where Sergeant Kipling, and we'll be careful here, Sergeant Kipling, it was an Air Force sergeant at one point, there was experimental drug for the anthrax, whatever you want to call that. Just don't use that word for anthrax. And he was court-martialed. And, you know, he finally retired from the military. They brought him back as a civilian and court-martialed him. And he won his case. And basically on the grounds that you could not actually meet the standard of informed consent because you don't have the long-term safety data is one of the issues. But, you know, when the ruling came down, they basically said, how is it that soldiers are expected to fight for freedom, the charter, personal liberties, but they're not allowed to participate in them? You know, where is the protection for the soldiers against the state, against, you know, their government?